Are there things that you all look back that you wish you had known, or you wish that you had done or asked at the moment that you were in?
You know, I tend not to think too much in those terms. We made so many decisions under such duress with sometimes limited information on a day-to-day basis. I mean, once that decision was made, the environment was the most intense professional environment I have ever experienced. And it's well to remember that the emotion was so high at every turn, and the entire team is working 7 days a week, long days. It's emotional. There were times when our security was at risk. So to lie awake at night and think, what about this? What about that? I am sure that there are different ways to do this work, but I'm not sure that it benefits us to question that too much. I think you have to, in some ways, go by instinct in a moment like this. That, you know, reason will only take you 90% of the way, I would argue, when you're in a true crisis environment. And to get yourself that last 10% over the finish line, I think is about heart, instinct, intuition, and you do the very best that you can. And I think it's also important to me, reflecting on that time, and I felt it at the time, but I understand it better now, that not everyone is equipped for that moment. And I think this is something that other CEOs ought to consider if they are in distress. Because when you hired your team, whenever that was, you hired them for a different set of circumstances than a crisis would entail. And you hired at the top of your capacity, and people were entering a different kind of culture. A crisis at this level is simply not for everyone. And it was very difficult to watch members of my team who had been incredibly high-performing members of my team in different circumstances really hurt during the crisis. And I think that that's a sadness for me, and it's also a leadership lesson for me, that if I ever am in a professional environment again where there is crisis management at stake, thinking about the composition of your team and their individual ability to withstand the kind of trial by fire that we went through is something that I would encourage colleagues in my position to do.
And boards that are doing searches, or executives that are doing searches, I mean, that's so well said. I think it's what they call the game time decision. When you're in the game, you don't have the luxury of the instant replay. Oh, now I think I know what I would do, kind of thing. So, Chip, anything though that you would say, I wish I'd thought of this, or I wish we'd done this?
So I think there was really only one on my end, and that is, I wish I had spent more time checking in on the kind of personal challenge that this posed for leadership itself. I think Melody, President Rose, and I were incredibly aligned as we moved forward along with her leadership team. But as closure occurred, I think candidly, my focus really did switch largely to students, faculty, staff, others, and sort of embracing them with compassion and trying to find a path forward with them that made them feel heard and valued as they left. I think I regret not picking up the phone every day and checking in with Melody and her team along the way to make sure they were doing okay, because I do think that we talked very frequently, but I will tell you that it was so intense, to your point, about the challenges that you were facing in those moments. I wish I'd done a better job of being a better listener and a more proactive listener for Melody and her team directly.
So as you all look back on your own experiences, was there something that came to your mind that said, that prepared me for this?
Yeah, actually. So I had the great honor of serving under Governor Ted Kalingaski, and my service began in 2006. And about 2 years into my tenure as Chief of Staff to Governor Kalingaski, this amazing challenge in American history occurred, in fact, globally, called the Great Recession. And we went from, I would describe it as thoughtfully large and growing budgets and excitement and investment in public education and elsewhere, to a place where we were drafting plans for what state government might look like with 50% less resources. And how do you prioritize the services, because clearly you're not going to be able to do all of them. And that was an amazing moment in time, an amazing moment in history, and a wonderful lesson for me in crisis management. And I would say being in that position in that moment, I think had a great deal to do with how I tried to comport myself during the course of the Marylhurst closure.
Yeah, great insight. How about you, Melody? Was there, as you look back in your own history, did you say, gosh, that was an important moment, I realize now?
Absolutely, yes. The job I held before being called to the presidency at Marylhurst was I was the chancellor of the Oregon University system. In fact, I was the last chancellor of the Oregon University system. And I had been hired, in fact, as a vice chancellor for academic strategies, and was in the job a very, very brief time before my predecessor, who had been in the role of chancellor for 9 years, was at a moment of change in his own career trajectory. And I got a call from our board chair at the time, who said, please gather the staff. I had staff in 4 offices across the state of Oregon, and of course oversaw 7 public universities, so far reach. And the chairman of the Oregon University System Board called and said, please gather your key staff. We have received the resignation of the chancellor, and I need you to deliver this message. This was a beloved individual, a friend and mentor to me and many, many others, and still is to this day. And that was a very pivotal moment for me in how you show up to deliver very difficult news, and how you care for people during times of crisis and shock, really. And the lesson I learned there was a lesson that I think we all carried with us through the Marylhurst closure, which is that when an institution experiences trauma, individuals are going to go through a grief cycle in much the way they do when they have a personal loss. So when folks would act out their trauma or their pain in any variety of ways, I tried every day to understand that they were in grief. And I tried every day to understand that grieving was not a reflection of how they might feel a year from now, and that it needed to take its process and needed to wash through in the way that it did. And so I had a mantra when we were going through this time, and I'll share it with Chair Terhune, who does not need to regret that he didn't call me every single day, because my mantra was, everybody's doing their best. Let's just assume everybody's doing their best. And if a student is yelling at you, if a faculty member is in your office pointing their finger, just remember that they're doing their very best. And the other thing that I would say we have to remember in moments of crises like these is that these governing boards are volunteers. They did not sign up for closure.
Or for a crisis.
Or for a crisis. Those of us on staff, of course, are at least being paid for our service. And it's well to remember that governing boards are well-meaning, incredibly valuable stewards of our institutions, but they have day jobs. And Chip and others leaned into the institution during the 6 open sessions that we held in a way that was absolutely unparalleled in my experience, a reflection of true stewardship of an institution. And I think we have to remember that these are all people that were probably fighting their own battles in their own day jobs. And those of us on staff need to remember that context.
It's a reminder of an old saying about boards that you better make good with your normal times, because that will prepare you for your crisis times.
Yes.
And you guys really exhibited that and learned from that.